All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It is my pleasure to hand it over to AFSCME Council 3 President Patrick Moran.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today about Maryland's new heat standards. My name is Patrick Moran, and I'm the president of AFSCME Council 3. The goal of today's webinar is to ensure you leave with the knowledge you need to keep yourself safe on the job when temperatures are high. That means knowing what an effective heat safety plan looks like and how to hold your employer accountable for keeping you and your coworkers safe. Last summer, our union tragically lost one of our own to heat stress on the job. Brother Ronald Silver was a sanitation worker in Baltimore City who died begging for water while working his trash route on a day when heat indexes reached extreme temperatures. In his memory, we are committed to educating our members on the new protections you have this summer to protect you from heat illness at work. At the end of September, Maryland's heat standard went into effect. Maryland is the first state on the East Coast and only the sixth state nationally to adopt a heat standard. What makes our state's heat standard unique is that it specifically covers both outdoor and indoor settings. That means whether you work outside or somewhere indoors where heat is still being emitted, like a kitchen, you are covered by this heat standard. Make no mistake, these heat standards are no accident. For the last 5 years, our union has fought to ensure all workers are protected from extreme heat on the job. In 2020, Maryland's General Assembly passed HB 722 to require the creation of a heat standard to keep workers safe. Governor Hogan's Department of Labor slow-walked the regulation for 2 years and published an initial draft that was woefully inadequate. AFSCME, in coalition with other groups, pushed the legislature to reject that standard, making way for the Moore administration to come in and create a much better standard. In September of last year, our heat standard finally went into effect. It is vital that we continue to push to ensure that our employers are keeping us safe from high temperatures and heat stress. I hope you find today's webinar helpful. We will be joined by experts from our National Union's Health and Safety team, as well as from the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We'll be recording this webinar, and afterwards we will be sharing the recording and additional resources being presented here today on the AFSCME Maryland website at www.afscmemd.org. That's www.afscme.org. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please submit your questions via Zoom in the Q&A feature. And at the end of the webinar, we'll be going through the questions that have been submitted. And now I want to hand it over to our health and safety expert. Our speaker today, our first guest, is Gavin Driscoll. He is a health and safety specialist with AFSCME, our national union, and he'll be reviewing what an effective heat safety plan must address. Gavin?
Hi, thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for joining this afternoon. I'm happy to share with you some of our information here that hopefully that you will find helpful. And I'm hoping that some of your employers out there may have already made you aware of these, the standard that's in effect. As Patrick said, this standard went into effect last September, so September 30th of 2024. It applies to the heat for indoor and outdoor work environments. So what's the entire purpose of it? Well, the entire purpose is to prevent heat-related illnesses from occurring in the workplace. It applies to indoor and outdoor work environments when that heat index reaches 80 degrees or higher. There are 3 exceptions to that scope, and that includes when there's incidental exposure. So that means when the employee is not required to do any work activities for more than 15 consecutive minutes within an hour, or when there's an emergency operation or essential service occurring. So that means when the work includes an emergency that requires the involvement of law enforcement, and medical emergency services, firefighting, rescue and evacuation operations, or emergency restoration of essential utilities or telecommunications. The concept there is there's an emergency situation evolving, so we're not able in a fast enough time to set up the precautions that should be in place during that emergency. But maybe there are things that they can do beforehand to alleviate such situations. And then it also does not apply when there's a building, a structure, or a vehicle that has a mechanical ventilation system that's able to actually maintain the heat index below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. What the major components of the plan is, it requires the employer to actually have a written illness prevention and management plan. Those include temperature monitoring, acclimatization, shade access, providing drinking water, high temp protocols. So there's specific things that need to occur and protections that are provided to the worker when those heat indexes reach certain points. And then the employer is required to also have an emergency plan. So when things go wrong, what are the procedures? Who's responsible? And the key with all of this goes back to the old adage of failing to plan is planning to fail. So all of these should be questions that are answered ahead of time. So when something happen, that we know how to respond appropriately and in a timely manner. And then as with all other safety programs, it really requires training, education, and an ongoing thing. So what does the written requirement require? Well, how actually is your employer going to provide you water? It's not good enough just to say, well, we've got potable drinking water within our building. How are employees able to access it? Are there special permissions? Is it readily accessible to everybody? Is it kept in locked doors and things like that? I will argue that if it's behind locked doors and only one person has a special key, then it's not readily available for me or the workers that need that. How are they going to provide encouragement and opportunities for you to actually get hydrated? It's nice in theory to say, oh, someone can take a break whenever they want. We know in true application that it doesn't always fly out that way. So they actually need to document how are they going to provide these opportunities and how are they going to encourage workers? How do we recognize and respond to suspected heat illnesses? What are the procedures in place? Are you trained to recognize what those procedures are? And then how are we going to introduce rest schedules? And how are you going to be provided enough time to rest and cool off in shade or cool climate controlled areas? How are they going to be trained to prevent it? And then heat acclimatization. How are people actually going to get used to working in these high temperature environments? What are the procedures when those high heat conditions occur? And then what is the emergency response plan? And I will break down sort of each of these areas. So the first is, well, we have to monitor to make sure that we know what our workplace is. What is the existing condition? So the heat index has to be monitored throughout the work shift, where employees perform work by following one of the following methods. They can do a direct measurement of the temperature and humidity at the same time and location where the employees perform work. They could use local data from a National Weather Service or other recognized source to determine the heat index. So for example, if you were to put in your zip code of your area or the city that you're working in, what is the heat index for that area at the given time? Remember, and it's always when the work shift is being conducted. So this is not just something that I need to check at the start of the morning to go, hey, what kind of condition do we have now? It's anytime our workers are performing that. So many of our members here will be on maybe under a 24/7 type operation. So if they have workers out there at all times, well, those temperatures are supposed to be monitored during those times as well. Then MOSH also allows the use of, it's called the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH. They have a heat safety tool app to determine the heat index. I will really encourage everybody. I know we've got 101 apps in the world in this day and age, but I would encourage you to take time to actually download this app. It's a very user-friendly app that you download it, you pull it in the variables of where you are, and it'll actually tell you what that heat index is. There's a QR code that you can scan on the screen right now. I will show you this QR code at the end of it. This presentation as well will be repeated, and we'll send out the links directly for you to access the Apple App Store or the Google App Store. Okay, acclimatization. So this is one of the areas where I call it where an employer more than likely will have an opportunity for improvement. Okay? Sometimes they may throw that the sky is falling, and they're not able to do that. But the acclimatization is basically how does someone who's newly exposed to this extreme heat actually work in a safe manner by building up their tolerance towards that heat. For the Maryland plan, it's for anybody that's newly exposed to heat in the workplace, or if you return to work after 7 or more consecutive days of absence from the workplace. So if you are out of work for personal reasons, for whatever reason it is, and now you're being reintroduced to that, then that employer needs to accommodate and explain how they will acclimatize you to that exposure that you're having again. During the monitoring, they need to be monitored during that acclimatization for heat-related illnesses, and they can do this one of sort of 3 different ways. We could use a phone or a radio. So that means someone actually checking in with me and seeing how I'm doing. They could use the buddy system. So if we happen to work in teams or pairs of people, it's again that buddy system checking in on me, understanding what that heat illness symptoms and signs could be, and making sure that I'm okay and sort of working in acclimating myself to that heat. Or they also allow for other effective means of observation. So what that means is sometimes there's technology that we utilize. You might have a smart watch or something like that. There's different technology out there that you can utilize to monitor an employee's health and well-being. An employer may elect to do that, and there's one of the means where Mosh says, well, if you were to use that, that would mean that you are effectively checking on that worker. So the schedule, it needs to be in writing. So this is not some theory that, hey, we will slowly introduce people in gradual work and so on. They need to actually have it written down how they're going to do that with a maximum increase of 20% per day. So basically what you're doing is gradually increasing that exposure over the 5 to 14 day period. And then it allows you to work in those high heat conditions with reducing the potential for suffering from a heat-related illness. Use gradual introduction and alternative cooling and control measures that acclimate an employee to the heat. So alternative cooling and control methods, maybe I may be able to work outside for a short amount of time, then they bring me in or allow me to utilize potentially, for example, a vehicle that has air conditioning and so on. It could also use personal protective equipment like cooling vests. There's different methods that the employer can use to achieve this acclimatization. In terms of drinking water, the employer is required. And again, when we go through these slides, these are the minimum requirements. So this is not, hey, it's a perfect world. This is now what should be provided. It's no, this is the minimum that should be provided. So they have to make at least 32 ounces of drinking water per hour to each exposed employee per workday. So for example, if I was to work an 8-hour shift, I need to have 256 ounces available throughout my shift. Now, here's the important part to recognize. Those 256 ounces don't need to be available when I show up at the start of my shift, but the employer has to have a method and a means to ensure that I'm able to get that water. So if that means someone bringing water, if I'm not working on site, if I happen to be working off site, if that means someone bringing water to me, then that would meet those requirements. But I need to be able to actually have my 32 ounces of water. Excuse me. And then they need to provide that drinking water at no cost to an exposed employee as close to the work area as possible. So if I happen to be working in a large facility or large property and I'm doing some outdoor work and I'm at the very far corner of the thing, it shouldn't be expected of the employee to have to walk back 10 or 15 minutes in order to be able to get their water, right? It should be readily available. So are there coolers that I could bring and utilize, or my employer could bring out with me and check on me? Are there different means or methods that can comply with this? In terms of shade access, it has to be provided to exposed employees as close to, again, to the work as possible. It needs to be outside, open, and exposed to air at all three sides to allow for air movement and for the employee to appropriately cool off. It needs to prevent contributing heat sources from reducing effectiveness. So, you know what? My shade cannot be beside a boiler if all of my heat is coming from a boiler or something else that's giving off a lot of heat, reducing the actual potential effectiveness of that shade. And then it has to be sufficiently sized for the number of employees that are utilizing it. So if you think of a 10 by 10 pop-up shade tent, if you have any those, or go to soccer games with kids or anything like that. So that could be an appropriate shade. Well, if it's for the right number of workers. So they need to also be arranged that I'm able to sit in a normal posture. And if I happen to be wearing any PPE, I need to be able to remove that PPE, store it appropriately, and still utilize my space. So a 10 by 10 probably won't fit 15 or 20 workers on there. It may fit 10, but it will really be dependent on allowing to ensure that those workers can adequately cool without creating more actual heat in that space. Now, if it's infeasible or unsafe to do so, then alternate cooling and control measures that provide equivalent protection to shade must be used. So if you were to think of a road crew, for example, in a non-emergency event, if they were doing preventive maintenance on the work, but they're not able to really set up a shade structure on the roadway to many different reasons. So in that case, it's not safe or it's infeasible for them to set that up. So now they'll have to come up with an alternative means of cooling and controlling that area for our workers. And then they will need to, so that may be a vehicle that could be utilized or a fan that's brought in to actually allow for cooler air movement, or a mister. So how does OSHA look at alternative cooling and controlling? So they define it as an engineering, a work practice, administrative, or other control to manage heat, including job rotation, mechanical ventilation systems, misting equipment, cooling vest, air-cooled or water-cooled garments, and access to recreational water. So depending on the unique situation that the worker is dealing with and that what the employer has, they may choose one or multiple of these options depending on what's the actual need and what that work environment is. For work practices or administrative control, that talks about, like, let's say job rotation. So maybe that workers are required every 15 or 20 minutes to rotate and cycle out from doing heavy manual lifting or exposure to the heat. Or they may have water-cooled or air-cooled vests, or a misting type system. So it really depends on where that work is, but emphasis that this is on an indoor and an outdoor heat standard when that heat index is 80 or degrees or higher. So what happens now? And then they got things called a high heat triggers. So the high heat trigger is when the heat index reaches 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Required is a minimum rest period of 10 minutes for every 2 hours worked. When it goes to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat index, then you're required to have a minimum rest period of 15 minutes for every hour worked. Okay, and remember, these are the minimum requirements. So it's not, oh, it would be nice if I got a 15-minute work in an hour. It's like, no, within an hour, I am going to get 15 minutes of actual rest period where I get to stop, disengage from the work, cool down, get some water, and different things like that. Then during this time, we need to be monitored to make sure that we don't have any heat-related illnesses. And the best way to do that is through regular communication. Similar to the acclimatization that we mentioned earlier, that could be the buddy system, phone, or just regular checking in. You may know your coworkers better than other people. So what may be normal for Gavin in his normal thing, well, during my rest period, if Gavin's not acting the way that Gavin usually does, is maybe that was what raises an eyebrow, and then someone needs to come and check on me and make sure that I'm doing okay, right? So the buddy system and looking out for our fellow members and coworkers are one of the strongest ways that we can ensure that our work environment is safe for us. And should there be problems, or I call them opportunities for improvement, that we can actually address those in meaningful ways. Now, they are also required to have the emergency response plan. That has to include a means for communication. There needs to be effective and accessible means of communication so an employee can contact a supervisor or emergency medical services. So let's say I'm working with the crew today. Someone notices that Gavin's not acting himself. He's sort of complaining how he's feeling. He's acting a little dizzy. He's sweating quite a bit and so on. So does your employer say, okay, when you come across this kind of worker or this situation, who do we need to contact? How do we make sure that Gavin is actually okay? Are you authorized to call 911? Are you supposed to go through a supervisor or a chain of command first? These need to be identified as how that will be addressed in this plan. How are they going to respond to that? Is it that Gavin has to now go to a health clinic to get checked out? Well, depending on what's happening on my situation, it may be more appropriate to call 911 to get a faster response here, or it may be appropriate to make sure that I'm actually having water, I'm adequately cooled, and someone's monitoring me as I start to recover. It may be that I need some electrolytes. And then monitoring. So now Gavin says, hey, I'm not feeling well. Someone has identified it. How are we going to monitor Gavin? We're not just going to leave him like, hey, our 15-minute cool down break is over, everyone back to work, and we're leaving Gavin here now unattended. How are we actually going to care and monitor for an employee that's exhibiting those heat illness symptoms? In terms of training, regardless of the topic, anytime there's a safety and health type training, it has to be in a language and a manner that all employees and supervisors can actually understand. Sadly, at times there may be persons in the supervisory chain of command that may not know all the details or all the ins and outs of the regulation, right? So that training should actually address those and make them understandable in a language that makes sense. When do you need to be trained? Well, initially, so prior to the employee's first exposure to heat. When does retraining need to occur? Well, that is going to be annually prior to exposure. So the good news, if you like heat-related illness training, you should be getting this on an annual basis. And then I think a majority of us will agree that that's adequate time would be in the spring or leading into it when adequate preparations can be made for the understanding before we just get full wallop into the summer. Then the employer is actually required to do a retraining when they follow an incident of suspected or confirmed heat-related illness. So, using me as the example, if I had an issue and then I actually get transported off site and I go to a medical provider and they're like, yeah, you know what? You're actually dehydrated. Well, that is now, so my employer now has a confirmed, I go back and I tell them it's confirmed. On the same sort of example, if let's say I just needed to cool down, I was sweating profusely, I'm getting dizzy, but it didn't warrant me actually going for medical treatment, but they needed to monitor me. They weren't so sure. They told me to rest and so on. Right now, that would be regarded as suspected. If it's not confirmed, it's regarded as suspected. So that employer should take this opportunity, is required, and to put that work site back through the training. So there is a failure somewhere. Yeah, it may have been Gavin, the individual, didn't have enough water, but sometimes it goes beyond the actual individual. There wasn't a true actual plan in place. It wasn't meaningful. It wasn't realistic. It wasn't site specific. And so now there is that opportunity where now everyone could potentially be a Gavin in the future. And so that's why Mosh said, no, at this point, we want to retrain. The whole goal of this is to prevent a work-related heat illness from happening. And so one of the ways to assure that is to ensure sort of, is our training adequate? Is it good enough? Is it doing what it says it's supposed to be doing? The training. It has to cover the work and the environmental conditions that affect heat-related illnesses. So think of you. What's the work that you do, and where inside or outside, or how are you exposed to high heat, right? A lot of us, it's the actual temperature. Maybe some of us, it's actually the working environment, depending where you're working in. Are there personal risk factors that affect heat-related illnesses? My lifestyle choices, medications that I have, different things like that could also potentially affect me and how I will sort of respond to a high heat situation. The concept, importance, and method of acclimatization. So how is the employer actually going to ensure that I am acclimatized or gradually introduced to these high heat temperatures so that I can work successfully without causing injury to myself or my body? The importance of frequent consumption of water and rest breaks in preventing heat-related illnesses. And then what are those different types of heat-related illnesses and symptoms? And what's the appropriate first aid and emergency response procedures? And then the importance and procedures of employees immediately reporting to the employer signs and symptoms of heat-related illnesses. One of the things, as you sort of see here on the screen, so for example, what are the appropriate first aid measures and what are the responses that would be appropriate? So some of the things that you should be looking for at your workplace is this is not just a training that should be, oh, it's going to take us an hour and we'll get it done. No, these are the kind of things you'd want to see. Are there posters up so that it's sort of as a friendly reminder? What are those symptoms? A lot of the symptoms with heat-related illnesses could be similar to other illnesses and so on. So it's really important to take the time to understand what those are and what the appropriate response to that is to help the person. Now, I'm a big fan of knowledge is power. As I said, there's some employers out there that will try their hardest and will still sort of miss some of these requirements. So I'm a big fan of knowledge is power. If you were to scan this URL, it'll bring you exactly to the MOSH standard. It's, I think, 7 pages in total. I would encourage all of you, even if you don't have to understand every aspect of it, to have it readily accessible for you so that you can see what your protections are afforded by law, what your employer is required to provide you by law, and recognizing that these are the minimum standards. Employers can go above and beyond and create some best practices out there, but everything that we've shared on the screen so far are the minimum requirements under Maryland law, which went into effect September 30th, 2024. And I believe this may be my last screen. So if anyone would like to download the Heat Index apps again, available on the App Store and the Google App Store. And then I will leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Gavin. I just want to give another plug. All of the slides that Gavin shared today will be on our website at afscmemd.org following the webinars today. So you will be able to have a copy of them and share them with your coworkers back at your work sites. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our second guest speakers for today. We have representatives from MOSH, the Maryland Department of Labor. I'm going to hand it over to Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Labor of Industry under the Maryland Department of Labor, Michelle Van Russel, to introduce her team. But we appreciate her having her with us today to walk through some of the resources they have for workers and employers, and then just talk us through kind of their triage process a little bit. So welcome, Michelle.
I'm going to have Sue Kwan and Emil, I can never pronounce Emil's last name, Chosen. Chosen. They are industrial hygienists. We are fortunate to have them with their science background and enforcement abilities to go over the standard. And then at the end, I'm going to explain kind of how it all works with MOSH. A lot of people think a lot of different things about how our enforcement agency works, and we'd like to make that clear for everyone. This is a very important standard. It's new. There's a lot of questions. A lot of everybody trying to do the right thing, and a lot of people trying to maybe stick their head in the sand, and we all can work together to make sure everyone works safely and goes home at the end of the day. So I'm going to let them explain their part of the standard and some other information to add on to what Gavin's already covered. And then at the end, I'll hop back on and go over how things work in MOSH if and when we need to become involved. All right, Sue, you want to take over?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. So MOSH has a website, and specifically they have a heat stress page. If you navigate to that page, you will find the available resources that we have. And as additional resources become available, this website will be updated, and the most up-to-date resources regarding heat stress will be found here. So if you'd like to go to the website and check those out, they are available for you. So one of the most recent resources that we've shared is a template model plan. And this document is intended to serve as a guide for employers as they're working to create their own plans. And really the idea is that they're going to evaluate their work sites and implement the appropriate mitigation strategies to manage the heat in the workplace to prevent heat stress. So employers are free to develop their own model if they'd like, as long as they include the elements that are outlined in the Maryland Heat Stress Standard.
And as Sue mentioned, employers can develop, their own programs. They don't have to follow the MOSH template, but this template or this program should be available to you, and I encourage that you can request it and review it to make sure that you familiarize yourself with how your employer specifically is protecting you from heat illness. Some of the items in that plan would differ from worksite to worksite. For example, if you're a field employee that doesn't have access to a municipal water system, how are they going to provide you with water during your field activities? Or if you're working in an indoor environment where you can't necessarily use a heat index tool like the NIOSH heat stress safety app, how are they going to monitor the temperature in your work environment to make sure that when those temperatures arise that would pose a hazard to employees, when are they going to kick in those high heat procedures, et cetera, et cetera. Gavin did mention that the heat stress standard was available for download. MOSH has developed an additional resource here, which is just a summary of the key requirements. It's a one-page document, really easy to read, and it outlines the key items for each of the sections in the standard. For example, heat index monitoring, high heat procedures, drinking water, training, et cetera, et cetera. It's a one-page document. It should be really easy to follow. Really encourage you guys to familiarize yourself with the standard and make sure that your employer is protecting you on your work sites for heat illness. And I think we're going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you both. They know so much, and Gavin's already covered quite a bit. If you have any particular questions for them, they are heat stress experts. Okay, so how complaints and MOSH's role in enforcement of the standard works. Typically, we write laws pass, we write implementing regulations, employers follow them, all in a perfect world, that's how it works. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. So we have random inspections, we have surprise inspections, we also have complaint inspections, where employees or their representatives can file a complaint. Typically, it would be a serious hazard that we receive and process. So if we try to put things in perspective for everyone, there are 2.7 million employees in the state of Maryland that we cover, right? So public sector, private sector, everything in between. It's a lot. And just like every other agency, it feels like we're trying to do more with less all the time. We have a total of 54 positions. They're not always all filled, that sometimes rotates in and out to do those inspections. So it's quite a lot of work. It's busy. Public sector is about 13% of the people that we cover, right? So like I think 9% is local government, 3.8 is state. But they also are some of the most dangerous jobs we have. Corrections, firefighters, there's a lot of very dangerous jobs in public sector. Because it's what we do. We're all public servants. We're all here to serve. But we want our public servants who are serving to come home safe at the end of the day. We have a lot of hazards to cover. We have employees that are exposed to fall hazards, struck by highway work, you name it, chemical exposures, and also heat. We all recognize that heat is a hazard. But when we look at how heat complaints come through, it's just starting for us, right? So we have a process it's been around. It's the same process that many of you may be familiar with. If you have a complaint and your employer you have an employee or you represent employees who are working somewhere and it's a serious hazard and you kind of can't seem to get it fixed. If you file a written complaint with us, signature is required, right? If it's an employee, we hold the name anonymous. And then if it is the triaging effect when it comes through, if it gets classified as a serious hazard, we have 5 days to perform an on-site inspection. With heat stress, there's a lot of elements in that standard to figure out what is considered. So just a violation doesn't initiate an on-site investigation. So if it's, say, a non-formal complaint, which, maybe not serious, like someone is not going to die at this moment, or it's not an employee, those get letters. So when a letter comes through, we have 3 days to send out a letter to the employer, write a response back. We have to evaluate that response back, send out the information. Sometimes if the response is not fully acceptable or it doesn't really address the hazards, we will reach back out and try and handle it that way. It is resource intensive. So I think one of the messages we want to get is we're excited. We have this new standard that will hopefully help save more lives and injuries and illnesses, obviously, with people working. It is hazardous work out there. There's a difference between discomfort, right, and danger. We're not here for discomfort. We have so few resources. So when we pull one of these investigators or inspectors out of the field, and we only have a few, we have to pull it wisely because that means they're not somewhere else making sure that hazards are prevented or accidents are being investigated. We run constantly all the time, 24/7. Someone dies at work, we have to be there immediately. So these guys are on call on the weekends, everything. It's tough. So we would ask just to help get this, because we want the protections for the workers no matter what. That's all of our bottom line. And working together with your employer, with AFSCME, with everyone, if we can get employers and employees to see the standard and implement it, it will help protect people. But it can't be us chasing everybody. It won't work. It will derail the complaint process if everything comes this way. So you have a really good AFSCME. We worked with Denise and some others on some recent legislation. So I know they understand our limitations, but at the same time, when we come out to do investigations, we don't issue warnings. It goes right into citations. So it is a big stick, but it's very carefully utilized enforcement tool so that when we send our inspectors out, that employers, are immediately subject to being potentially receiving citations and issued fines. So there's a lot on there. I started here almost 32 years ago and I've seen a lot. So I've been a public sector worker and inspected public sector. It's a lot of work that we can do together to bring up our public sector industry. Our goal is to get the injury and illness rates down. We're always looking for the best ways to actually do that. So injury and illness in public sectors, it's just something that we just want to try to avoid it at all costs. And if we can work together in a productive fashion, that would be great. So Yes, we'll top it off with, remember, grand total for the entire state, 2.7 million markers. We can get about 11 to 1,200 inspections done. Right, and public sector is about 10% of that, and public sector is about 10% of the population. So we're stuck. We don't have more people. All this heat stress, the new Davis-Martinez law, all of it came in with us, and we don't have more people, but our job still stops. You know, it still has to continue to go. People are still dying and have, you know, injuries and illnesses on a daily basis. So we have to work together, and I'm really excited to see how far we can raise the bar for safety in public sector by working together, having these new standards.
Thank you, Michelle, and we sincerely appreciate the work that Moshe and your division has done, not just to create this great heat stress standard that we look forward to being partners in enforcing, but also the work that you're doing to help educate employers. I think a big takeaway that I hope all of our members will take from your presentation, I think that employer plan tool is going to be helpful. We're certainly hearing from employers comments on, oh, well, we don't know what we're supposed to do with this. Does this apply to us? Well, I think we have a really good tool that we can show our employers now. Go on the Moshe website. They have a template for you that you can use as a baseline. We're going to, in our negotiations, when we're bargaining, we're certainly going to try and, negotiate above that, but it's nice to have a template that we can use with employers, that Moshe has provided for furthering these conversations in the field. So thank you to your staff. We appreciate your time with us on the webinar today as well. We are going to transition now into discussing, thank you to the team for joining us. We are going to transition now into discussion. I should say that we will also have the resources that Moshe shared with us available on our website after the webinar for anybody who wants to keep those too. So we're going to transition now into talking about what to do when you spot a violation. We thought it was important to kind of peek behind the curtain at Moshe as part of this webinar because it helps inform our strategy. We know that realistically we can't automatically jump to Moshe for every violation just because of capacity limitations there. And we also know that not every violation is necessarily treated equally either in terms of imminent danger. So, we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion on the strategy we're going to take up here as the council, at least initially this summer, as we work to enforce this heat stress standard. I'm going to kind of recap a few of the questions that have come into us so far through RSVPs on the Zoom and then throughout this webinar. We are also going to be following up with a question and answer document that we'll be including as part of our resources after this webinar, so stay tuned. And I want to give a plug that we'll also do another webinar this evening at 6 o'clock for any of your coworkers who couldn't make it. Please encourage them to join. But let's say that this summer, as we get along, you start noticing that your employers aren't complying with the heat stress standard. We are definitely encouraging you, please, please, please reach out to us here, reach out to our union. We want to document and demand first with the employer that they comply. You know now that there are a set of rules that trigger at 80 degrees, either indoors or outdoor. There are a set of rules, additional rules that trigger at 90 degrees. We will present checklists on our website for you to take away. You will have the actual standard itself that you can take away back to your work sites. That'll be available on our website. So please check for those minimum standards, check to make sure there are policies and trainings, but it definitely starts with you in making sure that we are enforcing this back at our website. But document and demand with your employers. Reach out to us. We will certainly help you assess if a grievance is necessary, certainly for very dangerous violations, just like any other worksite hazard that you have. We will do an assessment. We will certainly direct that we file Moshe complaints where they are appropriate. We definitely want to make sure that we are documenting with Moshe those serious violations. I think it's also important for their agency to know and keep a good tab of where violations are happening, particularly in the public sector. And, just to be clear, this standard, it affects all employers, right? School boards are not exempt from this heat stress standard. Local governments are not exempt from this heat stress standard. This is a standard that all of our employers are going to have to comply with. It is a baseline. At our negotiations tables, we can certainly negotiate for, anything above what is in the heat stress standard. But it is a expectation this summer that that standard is minimum protection that will be offered to our members in all of their work sites. So if we take, starting initially with demanding and documenting with your employers that they follow the standard, hopefully through education that we're doing here on webinars like this, more of our members will become aware of what their rights are. We encourage you to, at your local meetings this summer, at your work sites, print off the materials that are on our website so your coworkers know what their rights are heading into the summer. That's going to be a really big piece of enforcement if people don't know what those rules are in terms of shade access, in terms of water access. It's going to be much more difficult to enforce it. So please help us in spreading the word on what those new rights are heading into the summer. But yeah, we have the right to grieve this. We have the right to put in motion complaints. Just like other issues around health and safety, if the threats continue to safety and they are not addressed by the employer when we bring them forward, we obviously always have escalating tactics that we could pursue from there too, and will. So make sure that you are working with us and reaching out to the union as these violations occur. Trying to see if there are any questions that I think most of the questions that I've seen come through our Q&A involve kind of around enforcement and what to do. That's kind of our best in 3 steps. I think it's just to recap, it is documenting and demanding with your employer first that they comply. Reaching out to us, assessing for grievance and or escalation techniques if we need to, if they are not correcting their violation. And it's, putting in a motion complaint, where they are not correcting their behavior. They're going to be required to have these site-specific written plans. That's exactly the sort of thing a motion investigator will come in at if we're missing anything. Gavin, you want to jump in on anything I'm leaving?
Yeah, I was going to add, no doubt there'll be some employers that may be a little bit surprised about this, even though there's been plenty of media and coverage about this. So there's going to be some that haven't taken the opportunity to do it appropriately. There's going to be some that do. If you find that there is something that your employer is not within the standard, some of us have relationships where we'll just verbally communicate, right? In my world, if it's not documented, it's regarded as hearsay. So it's fine to give my employer the heads up and like, hey, this is what the standard says. We're missing out on this. This is how we can do it, right? It's nice to have that verbal conversation. But then I actually want to put something in writing, because if it's not documented, then it makes it harder to hold that employer accountable, because it'll be like, I didn't know. Well, actually, we have evidence here that shows it. The only other thing that I would encourage everybody is, so let's assume all of your employer's plans are active and real today. Pick that up. If you had never stepped on your site, does it actually tell you what that site is other than the address? So reading your plan, can someone actually coming in on their first day say, this is how I get water. This is how they're going to allow me to take a break. And if there isn't, or if it's so generic, then that may be an opportunity for improvement.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think a couple of questions slipped through. There was a question on, this obviously focuses on high heat. There are incidents, on occasion, certainly, where there are very cold temperatures, kind of extreme temperatures on the cold end of the spectrum. This standard isn't specific to that. I will only report, I know that we've got siblings, our siblings in Illinois are looking right now at a, potential legislation that covers extreme temperatures just writ large, which also factor in the cold. So it's, something to potentially look at in the future if it's something that, moves our membership. I will say that. Let's see how we do at enforcing high heat here in Maryland, maybe first. But yeah, it's something that I think unions certainly are looking at in other states as temperature extremes are fluctuating on both ends of the scale. So it's a good note. And then there was a question, Gavin, I wouldn't mind your help. I think I know the answer to this, but in terms of language access and trainings, I think the requirement there is that it's gotta, you have to make the training available in the language that's accessible to most workers on the work site. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be a fair statement. So this one, it says it needs to be in a language and the content needs to be actually understandable. So instead of talking about really high scientific type language and terminology, let's make it for the regular Gavin of the world to be able to actually understand it. That may not be true in every safety and training requirement, but it's something that we strive for. So whether that's under contract language and other items, we would try to make sure that all the training is actually in a language and content that's understandable.
So I think best case scenario there, we're certainly going to make our materials. I think we're working on getting them translated into Spanish. Where we need something different or additional to that, it's a great topic to discuss, like at a bargaining table, as an example of something that where we would like to go above what the heat standard may require, right? Okay. Well, I think that is all that we have time for today. Again, we want to remind everyone that we will be sharing the resources that were discussed today on our AFSCME Maryland website. We will also post a recording of today's webinar there as well. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Please stay cool and safe out there and document. Thanks.